the end of the sixth turn. It's been a strange week here around Smolensk. The Soviets still have a massive pocket here at Orsha. The Germans have been unwilling to attempt to reduce it because they've been funneling their supplies onto their shoulders here, trying to get in behind them. But the starve them out policy is really starting to take a toll because they're not able to get the supplies they need forward fast enough going this long direction. Even more importantly, Soviets have rather effectively managed to hold Vitebsk, resisted some attacks, held out just long enough with some supply. Probably don't have enough to make it one more turn, but holding out this long has been really critical to helping them build up this pretty solid line of defense here. Now they're trying to concentrate along this edge here, but it's been slow going. No rail lines, no roadways this way. So moving by foot, they're not getting quite to where they'd like to be in this little swampy area, but they're pretty close. Here in the north around Vitebsk, the holdouts here have been really critical to blocking that supply route for the Germans, forcing them to go this long route through this extender and across these heavy river lines. So their drive to the north has been fairly slow due to the inability to move subsistence and combat supply. Also having to chew up some combat supply in these repeated attacks here, trying to reduce the city. So good defense by the Soviets. Some real heroes holding out there. The German plan was to ignore Orsha here in the center, basically to bottle it up, keep it out of trace supply, and let them starve. But they have so much supply, and with that headquarters they're able to use their supply caches to stay alive. The Germans have plenty of power surrounding them here, these huge infantry divisions, plus a lot of artillery. But they don't have the supply to use those guys. This would be probably 2 turns worth of supply to launch attacks along the perimeter there. So they've been trying to go with airstrikes to inflict casualties if possible and just kind of wait them out. Definitely costing them, but that was the plan all along, to try to use the north and the south as avenues of advance. The Hoth's group here has pushed all the way to the outskirts of Smolensk along the road. Still, this is a decent line of advance, even though it's a very long supply route. He also has forces coming across the Dvina River here, and they have put a dent in the Russian defense here. This is a kind of a critical area to hold. It's the only bit of open spot, of open ground, non-swampy, that the Soviets have to defend. And they've been a little slow getting their men up there. And with these mechanized divisions, the Germans have a chance to punch a hole right through there. But only if they can win initiative and take the first move in this next turn. Otherwise, we'll probably have a lot of Soviet defense hardening up right in through here. Plenty of infantry divisions to move in there. And here in the south, the Germans largely have just been moving forces up slowly. These mechanized divisions are very thirsty. Take up a lot of on-map supply to keep them moving. So the foot soldiers are just kind of stumbling along behind slowly. But they decided to make a run at this little position here. Knocked back a cavalry division and managed to get a little bridgehead. So in the next turn, if they can hold it, they could very well put one of those engineering bridges here and have perhaps their next and last breach of that river line. At the very far edges, the north and the south, it's hard for the Soviets to really get a lot of forces there. There is this technique for moving off map and then back on map, but even that's a little tricky if your forces aren't in a position to make use of it. So they just weren't able to move enough of their reinforcements down to this southern part of the line. So they're stacked up pretty heavily right here in the center, and they just haven't been able to get quite far enough. If they're able to, they might be able to establish another line very long one along this river, and potentially keep the Germans from making any good progress. But it might be time to abandon this very far south and west position here. Now for the Soviets, at this point in the game, they're largely just trying to move reinforcements up to the front. They have pieces and parts of the three reinforcing armies still shuttling forward. Their logistics situation is really pretty good. They have rail capacity, they have a decent amount of supply, they have a lot of avenues for subsistence supply. The only place they're in a little bit of trouble is in the north, so they're gathering some transportation assets here to move them up there to make those extenders so they can get to make sure those areas stay in subsistence supply. But otherwise, they're just trying to reposition themselves for this next phase of the battle, where they try to hold the river line south and this swampy woods area to the north, and hopefully hold out at Smolensk for maybe through mid-August. They must have some crack intelligence forces because they know precisely when the Germans are going to lose all these mechanized divisions, so they just keep those defenses intact, use their artillery to break up any impending attacks, and try to defend in some depth with those infantry. They might be able to hold out just long enough to keep a victory in hand. Now this is a look at the beginning of the Soviet half of the August 1st turn. That puts us 4 weeks into the battle. I thought this would be an interesting checkpoint to see where things are. Really, for the first time, the Germans have put the Soviets in kind of dire straits. They have managed to cut off Smolensk. Basically, they have this rail line chopped, that one, the big double line right there. So therefore, this whole area is now out of trace supply. This northern area group here still has trace supply, but they're very, very weak, all told. Their two biggest formations are both disorganized. And then Orsha here is still completely pocketed. Now to sort of exacerbate the situation, the Soviets are a little lean on their supply caches. So that means they may have to choose between supplying one or the other of these pockets to try to keep them alive. Now the Germans have been going hell-bent for leather, mainly because August 1st sort of brings the game into focus. At this point, the Germans will have their treasured motorized corps on the map for 4 more turns. That's 2 more weeks of game time. So all of these armored divisions, motorized divisions, most of them, are just going to disappear. So what the Germans have been doing is just hitting as hard and as fast as they can. They don't care about losses, because when the removal comes, when the high command calls for these forces, the game says it's okay to pull them off the dead pile. So that's the intent. Kill them trying to make ground, and then remove them from the dead pile. So they've made pretty wide swings, gotten themselves out of supply in some places, used up lots of internal stocks trying to conduct combats, which has really cost them dearly in terms of supply, because they essentially have no stocks of supply on map anywhere behind the lines. They've thrown everything into this attack. So if they can't choke off this whole area in the next 2 turns, they're probably going to be really hard-pressed to get it done. The flow of supply is just going to be too slow, and the imminent withdrawal of all these forces is going to hurt them very much. Now the Soviets really have to hope for a good die roll this turn. They need to get another supply cache token so they can spend it supplying trace supply to both these pockets. If they can do that, their next best move is to assume Orsha is going to die, so just use what supply they have left, plus their internal stocks, to just make attacks all across the line. The Germans have no supply, so they'll have to either defend at a disadvantage with no combat supply, or expend internal stocks, which is just deplete the next round of supplies they have coming in. So that'll slow down the Germans and keep them from moving forward. If they can keep that group from getting up to here, that should help the Soviets in the final battle, which is to come really after August the 19th, right in this area right here. The last gamble the Soviets might be able to make is to use that game technique called a breakout and then try to, kill some of these forces and have them automatically return as reinforcements later and have them escape this pocket. But I think they're going to try to hold on at least another turn, put some pressure on the Germans. Since all these forces back here are out of supply, it'll really hurt them a lot if they have to try to force trace and combat supply up to these areas a second turn. So that's how it's going to be. A couple more weeks before I think things really come into clarity as to who's going to win. We'll see what happens. So here's a close look at the north side of the line. The Germans have managed to push their way through that swamp, woodsy area there, control that road, get themselves all the way down astride the railroad in two positions. It'll make it hard for the Soviets to reestablish that trace supply route. That is an out-of-supply German spearhead, but with their excellent action ratings, they survive their attrition roll, so they're still intact. But then we have some German units right there. The bulk of the Smolensk pocket is right here, but that headquarters will be able to likely survive and supply them with their supply cache. But there's just not quite enough Soviet power to the east to break through. Certainly not in time for a trace supply, but potentially for the next turn. A couple of infantry divisions could maybe fight off that motorcycle battalion right there. And in the center around Smolensk itself, the pocket remains intact. The Germans are bringing up these big infantry divisions, just trying to ring them, keep them in place, while continuing to shift what they can of their motorized infantry around to the flanks, to the spearhead. It's very expensive in terms of supply, so they're largely staying footbound for this moment. In here south of the city, the large German breach, with that engineering bridge, is swept around, really opened a giant hole all the way up to the rail line here. So you have units here blocking the rail line as well as trapping some of the Soviet forces. The 28th Army is cut off here. The 4th Army is actually just down the way here. They have supply because they're positioned against the southern map edge, so they can remain a thorn in the German side. There they are. They're currently just tying up a lot of German forces that don't have any supply to fight them. But they themselves aren't doing a lot of fighting because while they have subsistence supply, they're still not getting a lot of combat supply them either. And these Germans have these two very deep spearheads here at Roslavel and Spasdemyansk. So they've cut the rail lines in depth. The Soviets have to defeat two groups in order to open those rail lines. And that's going to cost the Germans probably. It'd be very hard to supply these guys this far from the lines. But if they can just push some transportation assets, squander some on-map supply to keep these guys eating off the map, they might be able to continue to block these and ensure the bad situation in the Smolensk pocket continues.